The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm Charles Christian, and thank you very much for listening in again. This week we take another trip to visit Naomi at Inannas in Norwich and listen as she explains the significance of the Imbolc, or Brigid Festival, which takes place every 1st of February. For those of you who feel that January must have lasted 5 months, payday is still somehow 6 weeks away and the Christmas must have been around 3 years ago, take heart, because we are already 1/8 of the way around the pagan Celtic Wheel of the Year. The date also marks the old Christian festival of Candlemas, and indeed until the 19th century, many households regarded Candlemas Eve, that would be the 31st of January, as the very last day in which you should take down your Christmas decorations. Of course, nowadays, it'll only be another 7 months before the shops start putting the Christmas decorations in again. But until then, take a deep breath and enjoy the start of spring. What else have we got for you in this show? Well, we go urban myth busting, this time looking at the theory that you can only stand an egg upright during a solar eclipse or at the time of the spring and autumn equinoxes. Yes. But first, for those of you who attended a Burns Night supper on the 25th of January and are still scratching your head about what it was all about, here's our Bluffer's Guide to the traditions surrounding Burns Night. I would just add that if you're Scottish, then no further explanation should be necessary. If you're not Scottish, then here's all you need to know, which can be particularly handy because a lot of the proceedings on Burns Nights are conducted in modern Scots, or Broad Scottish, a language which only has a passing resemblance to English. So let's start at the beginning. The first Burns supper was held by friends of Robert Burns, or Robbie Burns, or Rabbie Burns, depending on how you like to describe him, in 1801 on the 5th anniversary of his death. And it's been a regular occurrence ever since. It's nowadays held on the anniversary of his birthday, which is the 25th of January. Although, of course, modern times, with pressures on weeks and the like, it's more likely to be the closest Friday or Saturday to the 25th of January. Okay, so what happens? Well, if possible, wear Highland dress. Google it if you like, but that means men have a chance to wear kilts. It's surprising the number of men who do like wearing kilts. I'm not quite sure about that myself, but there you go. If you're Scottish, that's fine. Bit ambivalent about others. Anyway, it starts off with piping in the guests, Scottish piper there with the bagpipes. If not, there'll be Scottish music playing, and then the host gives a welcoming speech and welcomes everybody to the supper and talks about the background to it. And then after drinks, there's an awful lot of drinks on Burns Nights, everybody sits down and you say the Selkirk Grace. And this uses the Scots language. It's attributed to Robert Burns, although some people say it actually is about 100 years earlier than him. Anyway, it goes something like this. Some hae meat and canna eat, and some would eat what they wanted. But we ha meat and we can eat, and say the Lord be thanked. Which, roughly translated, means some people have meat but can't eat it because they're too old and decrepit, and some people would like to eat meat but they haven't got any. But we here at this Burns supper have meat and we can eat, and so we say praise the Lord. First course to be served is the soup course. You obviously don't need explaining what soup is, but some of the terms can be a bit confusing. For example, cockaliki. This is actually a spicy chicken broth served with leeks. And there's a thing called a cullen skink. That's skink, not skunk. And that's basically a thick soup with smoked haddock, potatoes and onions. Next comes the formal part, piping in the haggis. If you've got a bagpipe player, he plays the pipes while the chef brings in the haggis. Everybody stands and various tunes are played. And then we have the address to the haggis, which is a long Burns-type poem. I think it is a Burns poem, all about the wonderful nature of the haggis and how everybody should be jolly happy that they're there to eat it. It's a long poem, and not all of the verses are usually mentioned, but it does generally make fun of the food that the French eat and everybody else eats other than Scottish people who have the haggis, which is described as "For fair your honest sonsy face, great chieftain o' the pudding race," which means look at that little happy, smiling, honest face on the front of that haggis, which of course prompts the question of what is a haggis? Now, this is where there's an awful lot of myths about it, and indeed, according to one recent poll, 33% of American visitors to Scotland believe haggis to be an actual breed of animal. And indeed, you'll hear people tell you that haggis is a small Scottish mountain animal that has legs longer on one side. So when it's on the steep hills of the Scottish Highlands, it can run along without falling over. So it's got the short legs on the higher part of the mountain and the long legs on the other side. And it's said that the way to catch a haggis is to get in front of it so that it turns in the opposite direction and then finds itself with its short legs on the steep mountain side and its long legs on the other side, and becomes overbalanced, topples over, rolls down the bottom of the mountain and either kills itself or is stunned, and you can catch it. There you go. Now, the thing about haggis is it actually sounds more disgusting than it really is. Apologies to any vegetarians and vegans, because whatever I say you'll find disgusting. It's ground meat or minced meat. It contains sheep's pluck, which is traditionally sheep's pluck, which is the heart, liver and lungs, all minced up with onion, oatmeal, suet and spices and salt, and then cooked, traditionally encased in the sheep's own stomach. Now, as I say, it sounds a bit disgusting, though in recent years most of the cases for haggises have been artificial. So basically you're looking at a very large lamb sausage. Here's a description from the 2001 English edition of the Larousse Gastronomique. It says, describing the haggis, although its description is not immediately appealing, it actually has an excellent nutty texture and delicious savoury flavour. If you're wondering why on earth anybody would want to cook and eat the entrails, the heart, the liver and lungs of a sheep, it's thought that when the Scottish men were out driving cattle, hunting, whatever, if they killed a sheep to eat, the first thing they would cook, bearing in mind they had no portable refrigerators, would be the items of perishable offal that would have gone off the quickest. So they would push them all into the animal's stomach and cook it. And then, of course, the other parts of the sheep, the legs and the ribs and the haunches and all that, they last a bit longer. Anyway, that's that. Now, haggis is traditionally served with neeps and tatties, which is both cooked separately, which are basically mashed potatoes, that's the tatties, and the neeps are swede or turnip. So when it's served up to you, it's usually always plated up, you've got a big orange spoonful of mashed swede, a big white spoonful of mashed potato, and what effectively looks like ground meat or minced meat, which is the haggis part, but very spicy. It's typically served with a dram, which is a glass of Scotch whisky. And just for a reminder, the only thing in Scotland you can call Scotch is the whisky. You don't call Scottish people Scotch. They're either Scottish or Scots there. Anyway, since the 1960s, and this is where the vegans and vegetarians among you can take your fingers out of your ears, various manufacturers have been producing a vegetarian haggis, which uses pulses, nuts and vegetables instead of meat. And you can also find online recipes for homemade vegetarian haggis. And again, oats and barley, lentils, split peas, aduki beans, kidney beans, borlotti beans, peanuts, mushrooms, onions and carrots may be added to the mix. Haggis is also available in Scottish fast food establishments in the shape of a large sausage, told you it was a sausage, and deep fried in batter. Just by way of a little explanation, the Scottish fast food industry is world renowned for its ability to deep fry just about anything. Deep fried Mars bars were one of their first successes, but they can deep fry ice cream. I say pretty much anything. Served up with chips, this is your deep fried haggis sausage. It's called a haggis supper, as opposed to a Burns supper. There's also a haggis burger, where the patty is made of fried haggis, served on a bun. There's a curried form served in Indian restaurants in Scotland called a haggis pakora. It's also available deep fried. And you can apparently even get it as a topping for pizza. So now you know. Anyway, that's the main course. After that, there are pudding courses, possibly a cheese course. All of these washed down with whiskey. Nothing to worry about there, obviously, unless you have an allergy to whiskey, in which case don't go to a Burns supper. And then when coffee is served, various speeches and toasts are given. To all the men give a toast to the lasses, that's the women, and the lasses give a reply to the laddies, that's the men. But there'll also be a main speaker who gives a speech remembering some aspect of Robert Burns' life or poetry. And it can be, depending on where you are and who you're with, it may be either light-hearted or serious, and may include a recitation of a poem or a song by Burns. And the toast is to the immortal memory of Robert Burns. Now, one of the tales that is frequently told is that of Tam O'Shanter. And Tam O'Shanter gave his name to the distinctive tartan beret you find people wearing in Scotland. The Burns character gave his name to the beret, as opposed to the beret gave its name to the Burns character. It's a long, long poem, so I'm just going to give you a potted highlight so you know where you are with it. Essentially, Tam O'Shanter is a farmer, lives near the Scottish town of Ayr, which is also near where Burns spent a lot of his life. And he goes into the town on market day and goes to the local pub after he's done his business, and he gets drunk with his friends and he stays there late drinking with them and gossiping with them, and also flirting with the landlady. And the longer he's there, the more reluctant he is to go home, because he knows his wife is going to be waiting for him and be very angry. And indeed, she has scolded him in the past, saying, one of these days, Tam O'Shanter, you're going to come home drunk from that pub, fall off your horse and either drown in a river or break your neck. Anyway, on this particular day, Tom rides home, and as he goes past a abandoned church, ruined church that has a reputation for being haunted. He sees it's all lit up, and peering in through one of the windows is, still on his horse by the way, he sees lots of witches and warlocks dancing with the devil playing the bagpipes. Yes, back in the 18th century you could book the devil to play at your local dance. Anyway, he's watching it all go along, and everybody's dancing more and more frantically, and they're throwing off their clothes. And he's particularly taken by one young, well-endowed witch in a short dress. I think the dress is actually, it's either a short skirt or what we call a petticoat. It's known as a sark. And he noticed her dancing there. He comments that that dress would have suited her when she was a young girl, but she's a big woman now and doesn't leave much to the imagination. Anyway, he's so quite excited by this, and of course you've got to remember he's drunk, that at one point he shouts out, "Well done, Cutty Sark." Cutty Sark, Cutty meaning short skirt. So well done, you in the short skirt, or the equivalent of, "Cool, look at the legs on her." Anyway, immediately the lights all go out, and music and dancing stops, and all the demons and the witches come chasing after Tam. Anyway, he spurs on his horse and gallops towards the bridge over the local River Doon as the creatures are chasing him. But he knows if he gets past the halfway point on the river, over the bridge over the river, they won't be able to chase him because witches cannot cross running water. And indeed, as we've recalled on before on this show, most eldritch creatures, there's a reputation that they can't cross running water. So if witches are chasing you or angry fairies are chasing you, get some water between you and them. Anyway, just as his horse is crossing it, the young witch, that's the one he shouted, "Well done, Cutty Sark," to, makes a lunge for his horse. The horse is called Meg, by the way, and pulls off her tail, all the long stringy bits, and it never grows again. And so, by way of a cautionary tale, Tam is reminded for the rest of Meg's life of his folly, because every time he looks at the horse with its bald tail, he remembers that night where he almost got chased and caught by some angry witches and demons for bursting in on their festivities. And I say, that is the epic of Tam O'Shanter and his encounter with Cutty Sark, the witch in the very short skirt. And once again, we're with Naomi at Inannas in Norwich, and we're going to be talking about Imbolc and the awakening of things. Naomi, good to see you. First time for this year.
Hello, Charles. Lovely to welcome you back. Yes, here we are. We're almost already an eighth of the way around the wheel of the year. We're almost halfway now between the winter solstice, longest night, shortest day, and the spring equinox. So Imbolc, use milk, I believe the origin of the word, the emerging and the awakening from deep dark into light. And the coming out of hibernation of things will be happening soon, and the first flowers are beginning to emerge, snowdrops, aconites, primroses will come, crocuses. And so we also rather blearily emerge from our Christmas and New Year. Speaking for myself, but then, let's face it, I'm a retailer and I get a teeny weeny bit busy before Christmas. I don't ever get to send out winter solstice and winter seasonal cards at that point of the year. It's all I can do just to come in, keep going. So I do it now. Yes. And I send Imbolc cards and say to people, how are you doing? How have you survived through? Where are you at with life?
And as they are binning or getting rid of or recycling everything from winter solstice, I send cards with images of new beginnings and new life and new light and new energy coming to the land. And yes, it's a slow process. We're still in deep winter. The weather, not that hot, It's going to be snowy February and March. And a good cold winter's good. But it's at this time of year that I start to think, right, what do I need? What do I want? What can I restore in myself that I've maybe emptied out? And that's why when I start doing my tarot consultations, as I do imminently, I start again in February, I think, how can people be helped with this notion of where is my healing that I need? What is my repair that I need to do for myself? How do I restore the equilibrium and the balance of my life again if I have extended it too much in the directions of other people and their wants and needs over November, December, January? How do I bring that back to me? Bring it back to me. Where am I at? What do I want? What would I like to learn this year? What would I like to grow in my life this year? And although it's not spring yet, it's still just the germination of things under the soil. The seed woman guards them. The seeds are resting still, but they are starting just those first little green shoots to come. Sometimes quite unexpectedly, I discovered that a bulb of garlic that I hadn't eaten had beautifully greened little shoots, and I hadn't the heart to chop it up and eat it, so I'm going to let them grow and see what this little bulb of garlic would like to obviously grow into a garlic. But I've decided I'm quite liking seeing it put its little green shoots out, so I've given it a bit of water and I shall put it in a bit of earth. And it'll go in the garden, I think. And the fact that I located that and discovered that it had a little green spike coming out of the top of each of its individual little cloves this week seemed to me a meaningful thought, that even that seemingly dried item, in fact, only needed a bit of light, and out came green shoots. So those thoughts in mind, and certainly maybe the idea of thinking in a few weeks' time, let's plant some seeds. But even now, even if it's just thought seeds, that's okay. That's good, because at least you're paying attention to yourself again. And I think that's something that many people get distracted from through December and January, and we often feel very guilty about focusing on ourselves when so much else needs doing for other people. So retrieve that thought, and start opening the curtains in the morning and thinking it's a little bit lighter at this hour than it was last week, a fortnight ago, a month ago. So tomorrow and the day after, it's going to be New Moon and Chinese New Year, and we're moving through all of these new beginnings again. And in turn, all of the different traditions have their New Years and fresh starts and inspirations. Birch is a tree very much associated at this time of year with the clean sweep and the fresh start. Birch was used to make brooms, so it's got that idea of birth and freshness and scouring. This is the cleansing tide, this period after the winter solstice. Things are still going to get scraped back to the bones. There's going to be wind and rain and sleet and hail and snow and, buffeting of all kinds. So we need to look after ourselves, and we need to vitaminize ourselves and see if there's any new little shoots of herbs that we could add into things and sprinkle into things, and see what nourishing soups and hot drinks, because it's cold out there. And I think also when there's been great change, illness, loss, missing people, often this is the first years round that people have. And again, that can leave you feeling pretty scraped back to the bones. So good memories keep us warm, and maybe some thoughts of the idea of beginning to prepare to make a plan. And that's not putting it off, that's not procrastinating, which I am extremely skilled at, so I know the difference. It's about laying new foundations for things. And I think that's very much part of Imbolc. In the old myths, the goddess is young. She was reborn at winter solstice, so she's little. And in other myths, the god that was reborn at winter solstice, he's young, he's little. So we're finding our feet again. It's restabilising. Symbols of the swan and the wolf are associated with bride, Bridget, goes by many names. And she's the holder of the light of inspiration in her hands, and that light getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the sunlight gets stronger and higher each day. And so wolf is clan and family and protection, but also knowing the old ways of how things work, the lie of the land. Swans and wolves pair for life, so there are connections with relationship. Perhaps it's no accident that Valentine's Day comes up at this point. Of course, that is Lupercalia. Luper was the wolf midwife who suckled Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome. So there are associations there with mothering and nurturing and caring for new life. And Bridget's flower is the snowdrop. And many people see that as a symbol of hope.
The start of spring.
The start of spring, that new life comes out of earth that appears to be dead, dormant, unproductive, and yet it produces those little green spears and then the little white and green flowers with the yellow inside. And there's something so lovely about seeing a little bank of snowdrops, or even just a few that might have somehow managed to be in the middle of somewhere where they weren't before. And so hope. Hope, healing, restorativeness, self-care. And Bridget is also blacksmith craft and poetry and song. So there are good elements of creative inspirations there. What do you want to make this year? What do you want to be able to sing out this year? What do you want to be able to learn as a skill this year? So there's that too. So all the combinations of freshness, reinvigoration, rejuvenation, restoring oneself, all of that.
You mentioned Bridget. Now, she's interesting character because there's also the largely Irish Catholic tradition of Saint Bridget as a saint, and some versions of the story say she was originally a pagan priestess, druid, who turned over to Christianity. Others say, no, it's just simply the Catholic Church appropriating a pagan deity for their own purposes. What is your view on it? Because it's quite an intriguing one compared with all the other festivals on the Wheel of the Year.
As old traditions get overlaid with new incoming traditions, it would be nice if enforcement and adherence to the new wasn't due purely to the threat of execution. But I think there are, of course, very ancient origin deities, goddesses and gods of land, water, forest, valley, well springs, rivers, woodlands. So all of those ancient associations will have built up a body of association in that area, in that locale. And then as new comes in, you've got two choices. Either you say it's evil, wicked, demonic, bad, with perhaps a little side helping of silly rural superstition, old wives' tales kind of attitude, dismissive. Or you say, are you mistaken? This is a saint, or this is an angel, or this is an aspect of our new tradition. So I suppose it's going to be a mixture of the two. And certainly, since we know Christianity arrived relatively recently to these shores, and these myths and stories go back millennia, clearly there is a staggered introduction and overlay. And I think whatever perspective one comes with, the imagery and the potency of that aspect, whether you see it as goddess or saint, whether you see it as fairy or angel, if you can draw something that is positive and encouraging and in beauty and sacredness for yourself, then I don't have any issue with it. Perhaps some do, but I think that probably says more about them than anything else. So I would just simply say, draw from this what pleases you and makes you feel that you are connecting with whatever feels sacred in yourself. Certainly Bridget and Anna, two very ancient names, Brede or Bridget and Anna, may have connected to become Britannia. There are arguments and academic studies and scholarly explorations in many directions, and it's fascinating to read and look at that in historical detail. But I think for most of us, if we want to find a way to make it feel meaningful to us, we can create that ourselves and celebrate and honour and mark what feels meaningful to us in our own ways. But I think the thing is to do something, not to just think about it, but to actually do something that makes you feel it's creating your own little tradition and that you can mark it in some way. I know for me, when I see the first snowdrop of the year, which I did a couple of days ago, that's a special little moment for me. Or the first moment when particular flowers in my garden come out and I think, we're on the way, we're on the way. And, even if, the weather's pretty awful, there will be sunny days and I will be very acutely aware, the shadow on the grass has pulled back a little further now. Or that the first time you really suddenly think, wow, those birds are singing. I always have a little moment when I see the first really fat, ungainly wood pigeon with a giant twig in its mouth, flapping in a very ungainly way. And when you know that the nest building is happening, there's quite a community online, I think, who now watch peregrine falcon and osprey and, the birds nesting with the cameras on Norwich Cathedral spire. It's wonderful to be able to see so close what perhaps, of course, in past generations people would have had very easy access to. But I think, again, it's a celebration, the first egg, the first hatching, the first fledging. It's a part of our connection with nature, and I think that is the key thing. So whether it's Saint Bridget or ancient goddess Brede, whether it's snowdrops that remind you of somebody or a moment where you realise that your own life is due for a little bit of rebirthing and regeneration, whether you see it as your own inner Doctor Who coming out, or whether you see it as ancient magic in your own self. It's about living life and getting the most out of it that you can.
Are there any foodstuffs associated with Imbolc? Pumpkins, obviously, with Halloween and various summer foodstuffs for the later festivals, but what about this time of the year?
Oh, there are some fabulous magical theme Witch in the Kitchen books that we have with all sorts of lovely recipes and ideas. I suppose one of the most obvious is the egg, out of which extraordinary closed thing life emerges. So if one is an egg eater, then very much I would say make some lovely eggy combinations of things, some omelettes with perhaps some fresh herbs, the newest little leaves of things, dandelions, rocket, anything that's first starting to sprout. I would say also grain, because people would have been using up the last of the winter's supplies. And Bridget's symbol is the wheat straw cross. So I would say go for some good carbs, have some good grains of some kind, whether you're wheat, oats, rice, spelt, barley, whatever it might be. As I've said, the first signs of fresh green anything would have been a wonderful moment for ancient peoples in the lands where the earth had been quite barren for many weeks. So anything that was fresh and new and growing. And the first signs of, and this is a little bit later in the year, things like hawthorn, they were called bread and cheese. And people would, take those little tips of hawthorn leaves and incorporate them into things. People would have eaten a lot more foraged and gathered herbs than perhaps many of us do now. But even if we're buying them in bunches on the Norwich market, it's still that taste of new freshness. Depending on one's diet, obviously, I mean, in older traditions, you would have been working through the last of anything brined, salted, dried, cured, pickled. You would have had the last of the wrinkly apples, the last of the canned and preserved fruits, fish, meat, anything that you had managed to sustain over the winter. So you might be getting a bit tired of those flavours. So the idea that if the hens had started to lay and if the first herbs were coming up, you might make a very nice herby omelette. Add a bit of turmeric, which is A, terribly good for you, and B, will give it a gorgeous yellow colour. Make a really yellow omelette and sprinkle in some fresh herbs and maybe have that with a glass of something, maybe faintly pink, maybe pomegranate, a fruit juice of some kind, or something more bubbly, fizzy, and toast your survival through the winter. And, even though we may not be so much dependent on the produce of the land today, it's still a journey through darkness and through perhaps sometimes solitude and loneliness, through illness, through bereavement, through recovery, through breakups of families and relationships. It's a journey through. So I think toast oneself with a tipple of choice. And if you're not eggy, then maybe think of something maybe that's cakey, or something that's make some little egg-shaped nut balls, or, something that is nourishing, but that gives you that feeling that it's sustaining you. Yes.
Naomi, as ever, that was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You are so welcome, and it's such a pleasure to share with people my little random thoughts and ideas. I'm hoping that if people are within area of Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, Essex, please do find us online. If you enjoyed the story reading last time, I'll be doing a couple more raising money for the Norwich Puppet Theatre in early March. All info can be found on web and links, and it's always a pleasure also to welcome people to this little weaver's house and to celebrate what will be my 32nd year of having Inannas. So come one, come all. Good wishes to everybody.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Over now to the Isle of Skye, that's off the west coast of Scotland, for some planning news. Yes, planning regulations. What's that got to do with Weird Tales? Listen and I will tell you. The local Highlands Council has just turned down a planning application to build a new salmon farm off the coast of the island. Objections were lodged by industry groups and residents, citing concerns about the impact on Skye's tourist industry, good point, as well as the safety of local fishermen, that's because there's lots of underwater cages, and over the environmental issues relating to the use of the chemicals in salmon farming. However, by far the most intriguing objection was sent in by an organisation called Friends of the Eileen Floddigary Fairies. Yes, I did say fairies. What they have to say is that they say there's a mystical creature called the Ashrai. It's basically a sea fairy similar to a mermaid, which lives off the coast of Skye and has living there for thousands of years. Once a century, once every 100 years, these mystical creatures are drawn to the surface water to bathe in moonlight. But, say the campaigners, the introduction of the salmon farm cages would cause these fairies to come to the surface far more regularly than they should. And if they are out in daylight, they would melt away. The campaigners also say that there is a risk that the creatures would take their revenge on mankind by luring fishermen, people working on the salmon farm, with promises of gold and jewels into a deep part of the ocean where they would then drown. Yes, the thing about the Ashrai living for hundreds of years and coming up once a century is they bathe in moonlight, and if they were to bathe in, be exposed to daylight, that would be fatal for them. So the Ashrai could be a problem. However, there's more, because they say that the cages, the salmon farm cages, would also endanger the blue men of Minch. These are sometimes known as storm kelpies. They are mythical inhabitants that occupy the waters of the Scottish islands, between the islands and mainland Scotland. They, not very nice. They look for sailors to drown and for boats to sink. But again, they would also be endangered by these cages. I think it's probably fair to say that when the planning application went through, it was probably more on the strengths of the objections by the Scottish Fishermen Federation, the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association, the Northwest Fishermen's Association, and Scottish National Heritage, as well as local residents, rather than the Friends of the Floddigary Fairies. But who knows? Of course, it does raise an interesting prospect that we could use upsetting fairies as an excuse for stopping other unpopular development projects, perhaps the HS2 railway system, which people in the UK will understand the controversy about, a new high-speed railway which is already running years late and double the budget. There again, of course, those of us who regularly travel on the train from Norwich to London know that we do actually appear to go through an element of the other world, the land of the Fae, where time runs at a different pace once you get into the just past Colchester and start heading towards London. There seems to be a strange phenomenon where you're on the train and you should be getting there into the station in half an hour. But when you actually get there, an hour and a half has passed. Couldn't be anything to do with the slow-running, inefficient trains. No, nothing like that at all. No, of course not. Now, about those eggs I mentioned earlier, about standing them on their ends. That's the pointy ends rather than the just laying them on their sides. At the end of January, there was a solar eclipse visible in Indonesia, Malaysia and other parts of Southeast Asia, and it prompted lots of posts on local social media purporting to show that when the moon obscures the sun in an eclipse, it increases gravity and allows eggs to be balanced vertically on their ends. There's a similar theory, as it happens, that every year during the vernal or spring and autumnal equinoxes, which is about 20th of March and the 22nd of September, these are 2 days of the year in which the length of the day and night are the same. And supposedly this balance has a magical effect and allows eggs to be balanced on their end. So, true or false? Well, as it happens, true and false. Because although you can indeed balance an egg on its pointy end on these days, you can also balance them on their ends on any other day of the year. Well, I say you can balance them on their ends, but there are some eggs that you'll never be able to balance. It all depends on the shape of the egg. Those that are more pear-shaped are easier to balance. Similarly, those with rougher or flatter shells. Temperature also seems to have a lot to do with it as well. The warmer they are, the easier it is, whereas those straight out of the refrigerator are, and still cold, are more difficult. A hard-boiled egg is also easier to balance. It seems to have a more uniform centre of gravity, whereas with a fresh egg, the yolk is denser and its location within the eggshell will adversely affect the balance. So, if it's at the bottom of the egg, then you've got no problem. But if it's in the middle towards one side, you're never going to be able to get your egg balanced. However, it seems the biggest issue is the surface the egg is being stood upon. A hard, flat, polished marble worktop is far less forgiving than, say, a surface covered with a tablecloth. And it's interesting that some of the people who are balancing their eggs on the days of eclipses and on the spring and autumn equinoxes do seem to be putting their eggs on all manner of very sympathetic material, including in some instances I've seen gravel. Yeah, if you can't balance an egg on gravel, you've really got a problem. Anyway, the key seems to be, other than the fact the surface, patience. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. But I say, a lot of patience can take 2 or 3 minutes just to get one egg balanced on its pointy end, which a lot of people wouldn't have the patience for. Yes, and of course, obviously the caveat that some eggs are never going to balance. So you're wondering, how do I know all this stuff? Well, because the day before yesterday, day before I recorded this show, I spent a considerable amount of time practicing with every egg I could find in the house in the kitchen. I even resorted to violently shaking one egg like a crazy man until I'd broken the yolk and effectively scrambled it while it was still in its own shell. And this created a far more uniform consistency without the dense yolk upsetting the balance. Yeah, I know. We make our own entertainment out here in Weird Tales Radio Land. I should just add that all my experiments provided huge amusement for Janie, who was in the kitchen with me at the time. She was eating her lunch. Janie says hi, by the way, and will be coming back on the show in a couple of weeks. She's currently attending a course at art school and is snowed under with painterly projects. So, to conclude, you can balance some eggs on their ends at any time of the day on any day of the year. And you will also provide your family and friends with entertainment as you try to do so. Janie and I have both been suffering from insomnia recently. I think it's an age thing, but we'll gloss over that. And so I thought I'd look in one of my books of magic spells to see if there were any handy tips for dealing with insomnia. One of the most popular ones is the concept of a special bath that you soak in. Now, there's a bit of common sense here, because soaking in a bath or having a shower, last thing is generally regarded as being a relaxing thing at the best of times. If you have the opportunity to soak in a bath, and I appreciate a lot of us now only have showers, here's a recipe. It's called Hecata's bath spell. Hecate was at a temple in Colchis, and including the priestess Medea worked there. They devised various sleeping potions. Anyway, this is a simple version of it. Gently warm some milk. The quantity is up to you. The more milk, the more luxurious and soothing the bath. When the milk is warm, carefully add honey, stirring it so that it blends. Remove from the heat and add several drops of essential oil of lavender. Then add that to a bathtub that is, filled with warm water, and have a soak in it. There's an alternative version, which is called Hecate's Sweeter Sleep Bath. And you have 1 cup of milk, 1/4 cup of honey, quite a lot of honey that, 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, 4 drops of essential oil of lavender, and 4 drops of essential oil of chamomile. Warm the milk, stir in the honey. When they're blended, remove from the heat and add in the vanilla extract and essential oils, and then mix it all through in a warm bath and get in there and soak. It also appears that the natural gems, jet and amber, which are based on crystallized botanical material rather than true minerals, work together to provide sleep. So if you can buy or make a jet and amber necklace, do so and put it round your neck, and apparently this will help you sleep rather better. And then we have a Sleep Like You're Dead pillow, and this uses botanicals, a mixture of botanicals that have earned the nickname graveyard dust because they allegedly encourage you to sleep as soundly and peacefully as the dead. And you use patchouli, mullein and valerian. Some of you will probably know that you use valerian tea as a way to get to sleep, as a drink. So grind all the botanicals together to create a fine powder. Possibly also add poppy seeds to it. Poppy seeds were the first form of anaesthetic. And fill a pillow with the botanicals. Put them under your head and you will go to sleep. Apparently for enhanced dreaming, add chopped up bay leaves as well. So, some little tips there for dealing with insomnia. And that's it. Time for me to go. But let's just have one final and actually quite sweet story about the Garita del Diablo, or Devil's Sentry Box, at Fort San Cristobal in Old San Juan in Puerto Rico. Now, the fort, San Cristobal, was one of the old colonial Spanish fortifications in the New World. It was particularly constructed to repel enemy attacks from the sea. One of the features, indeed feature of a lot of the Spanish forts, are little stone sentry boxes known as garritas, where the soldiers stood guard at night. Now, one of these boxes, this was built in 1634, stands out from the rest on a little headland set away from the main part of the fort. And this is the one that's known as Garita del Diablo. Because of its remote location, it wasn't a popular posting for the Spanish guards, not least because being near the surf, there were often eerie sounds to be heard. Now, the soldiers in the sentry boxes would occasionally shout at each other at night to make sure everyone was all right and awake. But because the Garita del Diablo was so far away, the soldiers had to shout even louder to compete with the crashing sounds of the ocean waves and the howling wind. Now, one particular night, a soldier called Sanchez was standing guard at this sentry box. However, every call directed at him went unanswered, and the other soldiers feared for Sanchez's safety, but no one dared leave their post to check him out until sunrise. Obviously, you can't abandon your post in the military. Come the sunrise, they headed over to the stone sentry box, but they could find no sign of Sanchez. All that was left were his rifle and his uniform. The superstitious guards, remember, this is in the 1630s, the superstitious guards claimed Sanchez had been snatched away by the devil, and so the legend began that this was the devil's sentry box. However, some locals, but they didn't tell the army, they had a more logical explanation. They said Sanchez had deserted his post to escape with the love of his life, a girl called Diana. Sanchez, when he was off duty, would play his guitar and sing to her to express his love. However, neither his superiors in the military nor Diana's stepmother approved of the relationship. The couple therefore decided that they would elope, and they agreed to meet one night when Sanchez was posted at the sentry box to make their escape. Diana brought him civilian clothes, and then they escaped in the dark to a nearby cottage and were never seen again. The Garita del Diablo is still fairly difficult to reach if you're a visitor, a member of the general public, although if you don't mind scrambling over rocks, you can get to see it. So, the Garita del Diablo. But actually, it's a rather sweet love story. It now just remains for me to say thank you for listening, and I'll hope you'll join me again, same time next week. Till then, this is Charles Christian on the Weird Tales Radio Show saying, stay well, stay different.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales Radio Show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales Radio Show. Good night.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.